My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 62 years old, and after I drained my retirement savings to help my son buy his dream home, my daughter-in-law told me I didn't fit in at their Christmas table. Before I tell you all about the moment I foreclosed on their lies in front of the entire town, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's a strange comfort to know you're not alone, and for a long time, I felt utterly alone. The fluorescent lights of the cardiac care unit at St. Elizabeth's hummed a familiar, monotonous tune. It was a sound I'd known for 34 years. At 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, the unit was an island of controlled calm in a sea of sleeping houses. As head nurse, this was my domain. A world of rhythmic beeps, hushed conversations, and the clean, sharp scent of antiseptic that clung to everything. I straightened a patient's chart, my eyes scanning the doctor's notes with a practiced efficiency that had become second nature. My body ached with a fatigue that had dug its roots deep into my bones over the past year. But I pushed it aside. You don't get to be tired when lives are on the line. My shift was nearly over. Before heading home to my small, quiet house on Maple Street, I sank into the worn chair at the nurse's station and pulled out my phone. It was a ritual I performed on the 15th of every month. I navigated to my bank's app, the screen glowing in the dim light. My savings account, once a healthy cushion I'd built with my late husband, James, looked painfully thin now. I'd moored the knot in my stomach and initiated the transfer. Amount? $4,200. Recipient? David Wilson. Memo? Mortgage payment. November. I hit confirm and watched the balance shrink. Another month, another massive piece of my security chipped away. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, and saw James's face, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he smiled. "You worry too much, Maggie," he would have said. "The boy will be fine." But it wasn't David I was worried about, not really. It was the situation. It was supposed to be temporary. That's what he told me a year ago, sitting at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped him with his homework, and where we'd eaten countless meals after we lost James. "It's just for a little while, Mom," he'd said, his eyes avoiding mine. "Catherine and we got in a little over our heads with this house. The interest rate on the mortgage adjusted. If you could just help us with the payment until I get this promotion at work, we'll pay you back every cent." How could I say no? He was my only child, the last piece of James I had left on this earth. I remembered his graduation day, the pride swelling in my chest so fiercely I thought it might burst. He was the first in our family to get a college degree. I'd worked 60-hour weeks, taking the overnight shifts nobody wanted to make sure he could finish his education without the crushing weight of student loans. The inheritance from James had barely covered the funeral and the last of our own mortgage. The rest was on me, and I'd done it, gladly. So when he asked for help, I said yes. A quick scroll through my email showed the usual hospital memos and junk mail. There was one from my bank with the subject line, "Unusual Account Activity Alert." I opened it. It mentioned a line of credit I didn't recognize. I frowned, thinking it must be a phishing scam. David was always warning me about those. I was too tired to deal with it now. I deleted the email and started gathering my things. My body was sending signals I'd been ignoring for weeks. A persistent cough and exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. The next day, that exhaustion brought me to my knees. A coughing fit in the hospital corridor left me breathless, leaning against the wall for support. My friend and colleague, Dr. Rebecca Montgomery, the hospital's chief of medicine, saw me, and her expression turned stern. "That's it, Margaret," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You're going to the ER for a chest x-ray right now. I'm not asking, I'm telling you." An hour later, I had a diagnosis. Pneumonia. Severe. Complicated by what Rebecca called profound exhaustion. "I'm putting you on mandatory medical leave for 4 weeks, she declared, signing a form. "Your health has to come first. No arguments." Lying in a hospital bed, a strange and humbling experience for a nurse, the financial reality crashed down on me. 4 weeks with no overtime pay. The mortgage payment for David was due again in 2 weeks. I had to make the call. I had to ask them to cover their own expenses, just for a month or two. It was their house, after all. Surely they would understand. I dialed Catherine's number, my heart thumping with a strange anxiety. "Catherine, hi, it's Margaret," I said when she answered, my voice raspy. "Barbara," she replied, using the formal version of my name she had adopted after the wedding. Her tone was cool, distant. "Is something wrong? I'm in the middle of booking our flights." "I'm in the hospital," I said plainly. "I have pneumonia. The doctor has me on leave for at least a month." I explained the situation, how I wouldn't be able to make the next mortgage payment. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of typing. "So, you're saying the money won't be coming?" she finally asked. There was no concern in her voice, no, "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" Just a flat, transactional question. "I can't, Catherine. I was hoping you and David could handle it until I'm back on my feet." Her laugh was short and sharp like breaking glass. "Handle it? Barbara, we have plans. We've already put a non-refundable deposit on a ski chalet in Vermont for Christmas with my parents. You can't just back out now. Your timing is just terrible." The callousness of it stole my breath. I had sacrificed my health, my savings, my future for them. And my illness was an inconvenience. It was a problem with her timing. "This isn't about timing, Catherine," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is about my health." "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before," she snapped, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, the hum of the hospital equipment fading into a dull roar in my ears. It wasn't the pneumonia that was suffocating me. It was the chilling realization that to my own family, I was no longer a person. I was just a monthly payment. For 3 days, I heard nothing. The silence from my son was louder and more painful than any angry words could have been. The hospital staff, my work family, bustled in and out of my room with flowers, magazines, and comforting words. Susan Chen, a younger nurse I'd mentored, sat with me during her lunch break, her brow furrowed with worry. "You need to stop, Margaret," she said gently, peeling an orange for me. "This isn't right. They're adults. You're killing yourself for them." I knew she was right, but hearing it from someone else felt like a betrayal of my own son. "It's complicated, Susan," I murmured.
"No, it's not," she insisted. "It's simple. You raised him. You put him through college. Your job is done." On the 4th day, David finally called. My heart leaped with a foolish hope that he was calling to apologize, to see how I was. I was wrong. "Mom," he began, his voice tight and annoyed, "Catherine told me what you said. We're in a really tight spot here. The payment is due next week." Not a single question about my health. Not one. The hope in my chest curdled into something cold and hard. "I have pneumonia, David. I'm on medical leave." "I know, and that's rough, but what are we supposed to do?" he pressed on, his voice rising with frustration. "We just ordered a new dining room set for the holidays. We're hosting a big pre-Christmas dinner for Catherine's colleagues. Her boss is coming. This is important for her career." A dining room set. A party. These were the priorities. Not his mother's health. Not the fact that I had worked 60-hour weeks, my back screaming in protest, to fund the very lifestyle he was now using as an excuse. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you bought a house you couldn't afford," I said, my voice raspy but firm. "That's not fair. We have a certain status to maintain now, Mom. You don't understand," he shot back. The words "you don't understand" felt like a slap. I understood all too well. I understood that my son was a stranger, someone who valued appearances more than his own mother. Then came the final blow. 2 weeks before Christmas, after I was discharged from the hospital and recovering at home, Catherine called again. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I had come to dread. "Barbara, hi! Just calling to finalize our holiday plans. As you know, we'll be having Christmas dinner at my parents' estate this year. It's going to be a very formal affair. Mostly their friends and business partners." She paused for effect. And we were all thinking, well, honestly, Barbara, you just don't fit in. It would be awkward for everyone. We think it's best if you make other plans. The phone felt slick in my hand. I stared out my kitchen window at the bare branches of the maple tree James and I had planted when we first moved in. 34 years of memories in this house. Countless scraped knees kissed better. A lifetime of unconditional love poured into one child. And it had come to this. I had paid $50,400 towards their mortgage in the last year alone. I had sacrificed my health, and now I was being uninvited for Christmas because I wasn't polished enough for their new glittering life. I wasn't good enough to sit at their table. I see, I said. My voice was eerily calm. The storm inside me had passed, leaving behind a terrifying, absolute clarity. Great, I knew you'd understand, she chirped, relieved. Talk soon. She hung up. I stood there for a long time, the silence of my little house on Maple Street pressing in on me. The woman who told me I didn't fit in lived in a house I was paying for. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. That was it. That was the end. The part of me that had made excuses for them, that had held on to hope, simply died in that moment. I walked over to my desk, my movements stiff. I found the stack of old bank statements I kept for tax purposes. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. Now was the time for action. My son had made his choice. He had chosen their life, their status, their Christmas table. Now I would make mine. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years, but had never forgotten. Martin Goldstein, please, I said to the receptionist. Tell him it's Margaret Wilson. Martin Goldstein's office smelled exactly as I remembered it from 20 years ago when I sat there, numb with grief, sorting out James's affairs. It was the scent of old leather, paper, and freshly brewed coffee, a smell of stability and quiet competence. Martin himself had more gray hair and a few more lines around his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp and kind as ever. Margaret, he said, rising from behind his massive oak desk to shake my hand. It's been too long. I'm sorry it's under these circumstances. Your sister Linda called me. She was worried. I hadn't even thought to call my sister. I'd been so isolated in my bubble of work and sacrifice. I should have called you sooner, Martin, I said, sinking into the plush leather chair opposite him. Better late than never, he said gently. Now tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And I did. I told him about the 60-hour weeks after James's funeral, the pride I felt funding David's college education. I told him about Catherine, the lavish wedding, the house in Lakeview Heights. I laid out the financial requests, starting with the first loan of $5,000 and culminating in the year-long commitment to pay their $4,200 monthly mortgage. I told him about my pneumonia and the final cruel dismissal from their Christmas celebration. Martin listened patiently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. He didn't interrupt, his expression growing more grave with every detail. When I finished, he put his pen down and looked at me over the top of his glasses. First of all, Margaret, what you've done comes from a place of love. Never doubt that, he said, his voice firm. But love does not require you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. These are not the actions of grateful children. They are the actions of exploiters. The exploiters hung in the air, harsh and ugly, but undeniably true. What can I do, Martin? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I've already stopped the mortgage payments. That's a good first step, he nodded, but we need to protect what you have left. You mentioned you had some retirement savings, and this house is paid off, correct? Yes, I confirmed. Good. We need to do a full review of your financial exposure. Have you co-signed any other loans for them? Credit cards, car loans? A cold dread trickled down my spine. There was a line of credit, a home equity line of credit, on their house. They said they needed it for renovations last year. They needed a cosigner to get the best interest rate. I signed the papers. Martin's expression became instantly alert. How much was it for? $50,000, I said, the number feeling obscene on my tongue. He swore softly under his breath. Margaret, we need to check the status of that account immediately. If they default, the lender will come after you for the full amount. It could put a lien on this house. They could wipe out your savings. He swiveled to his computer and his fingers flew across the keyboard. He had me log into my online banking to give him access. As he worked, I felt a rising panic. I had been so focused on the mortgage that I had completely forgotten about the HE lock. The bank's unusual activity email alert flashed in my mind. It wasn't a scam. It was real. "Ah," he said, his voice tight. "Here it is. The account is with a subsidiary of your bank. That's why the email alert came to you." He turned the monitor towards me.
My breath hitched. The screen showed a balance of $48,622. They had used almost all of it. But that wasn't the worst part. Martin pointed to a line item. "Look at this, Margaret. This is the signature card they have on file for you as the co-signer." He zoomed in on the image. It was my name, in a looping script that was a passable imitation of my handwriting, but it wasn't mine. The M was too rounded, the W too sharp. It was a forgery, a clumsy one, but one that had clearly passed muster with a bank that wasn't paying close enough attention. A hot white flash went off behind my eyes. The feeling was so intense, so visceral, it was like being struck by lightning. My son had forged my name. He had committed a crime against me. The mortgage payments were a moral failure. This was fraud. "That's not my signature," I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage so profound it left me weak. Martin's face was grim. He reached across the desk and gently patted my hand. "I know it's not, Margaret, and this changes everything." He leaned back, his eyes hard as steel. "This is no longer just a family dispute about money. This is a felony, and it gives us leverage, a great deal of leverage." He looked at me, his gaze steady. "So the question is, Margaret, how do you want to play this?" Leverage. The word echoed in the quiet of Martin's office. It was a lawyer's word, a word of power and strategy. It was not a word a mother ever expected to use in relation to her own child. For a moment, my mind recoiled. Sue my own son? Expose him as a criminal? Martin must have seen the conflict warring on my face. "We don't have to press charges, Margaret," he clarified gently. "The knowledge that we can is the leverage. It's our shield and our sword. First we protect you, then we decide what justice looks like." His first order of business was to contact the bank's fraud department, not as an accuser, but as a concerned party. He framed it as a potential identity theft issue, putting the bank on notice and freezing the HELOC account without immediately pointing the finger at David. "This keeps our options open," he explained. My second step, he advised, was more difficult. I had to go to my own bank and, with a heavy heart, withdraw the nearly $49,000 from my retirement savings to be placed in an escrow account with his firm. "Why?" I asked, the thought of depleting my nest egg making me physically ill. "Because if they did this once, they might have tried other things," Martin said grimly. "We need to move your liquid assets to a place they can't possibly touch. Think of it as a temporary measure. Once we resolve the fraud issue with the other bank, and trust me, they will be very motivated to resolve it quietly to avoid a scandal, we can get that money back from them. For now, safety first." I left his office feeling like I had been hollowed out. The drive to the bank was a blur. I felt the teller's curious eyes on me as I signed the withdrawal forms, my hand shaking slightly. This was the money James and I had saved for our golden years, for trips to see the Grand Canyon and the rocky coasts of Maine. Now, it was being used to build a fortress against our own son. The next few days were a strange mix of emptiness and empowerment. The constant low-grade anxiety about the next financial request was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I followed Martin's advice to the letter. I did not answer David or Catherine's increasingly frantic calls and texts. Instead, I answered a call from my neighbor, Ellie Walsh. "Margaret, honey, I see you're home from the hospital," she said, her voice warm and full of life. "I was just about to put up my Christmas lights. Frank always loved them. I could use a hand holding the ladder if you're feeling up to it." For the first time in years, I said yes to a neighbor. I spent the afternoon with Ellie, untangling strings of lights, drinking hot cocoa, and sharing stories about our late husbands. It felt normal. It felt good. That evening I went to my first book club meeting with Grace Thompson, another friend I'd neglected. We discussed a novel, and for 2 hours I didn't think about mortgages or betrayal. I was just Margaret, a woman with opinions on literature.
The bubble of my new, fragile peace was burst a few days before Christmas. The doorbell rang, and through the peephole I saw a sleek, dark sedan parked at my curb. Standing on my porch was a tall, imposing man in an expensive cashmere coat. Thomas Parker, Catherine's father. I had met him only a handful of times, at the wedding and a few other stilted family events. I opened the door. "Mr. Parker," I said, my voice even. "Mrs. Wilson." He nodded stiffly, his eyes sweeping over my modest living room with a look of faint disdain. "May I have a word?" He stepped inside but refused my offer of a seat, preferring to stand like a general surveying a battlefield. "I'll be direct," he began, clasping his hands behind his back. "Catherine and David are distressed. It seems you have ceased the financial arrangement that was in place." "Arrangement is a generous word for it, Mr. Parker," I replied calmly. "I was paying their entire mortgage." "Be that as it may," he waved a dismissive hand, "your decision has caused them significant hardship at a very inconvenient time. Appearances, as you might understand, are important. We have a certain standing in the community." "I'm sure you do," I said. He seemed to take this as an encouragement. "They're hosting important people. The last thing we need is for them to be worried about foreclosure. It would be embarrassing." There it was. Not concern for their well-being, but fear of social embarrassment. "What is it you want from me?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He reached into his coat and produced a checkbook and a gold pen. "I am prepared to compensate you for your trouble, a consultancy fee, if you will. You resume the payments through the holiday season to maintain stability. In return, I will write you a check for, let's say, $10,000 for your cooperation." I stared at him. I stared at the checkbook as if it were a venomous snake. He was trying to bribe me, to pay me to continue bankrolling my own son's irresponsible life so his daughter wouldn't look bad at her Christmas parties. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was almost comical. I let out a small, quiet laugh. He looked up, startled. "Mr. Parker," I said, my voice as clear and cold as the winter air outside, "my love for my son is not for sale. My dignity is not for sale. And my financial security is certainly not for sale." I walked to the door and opened it. "And since you're so concerned with appearances," I added, looking him straight in the eye, "perhaps you should know that my lawyer is currently investigating a fraudulent signature on a $50,000 loan taken out in my name. I wonder how that would look in the society pages." The blood drained from Thomas Parker's face. The checkbook vanished back into his coat. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. For the first time, he saw me not as a dowdy, insignificant mother-in-law, but as something else entirely. A threat. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Parker," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. He turned and practically fled from my porch without another word. As his luxury car sped away from Maple Street, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering in my chest. I had faced the dragon and had not been burned. I had found my sword. The phone rang less than an hour later. It was David. The speed with which Thomas Parker had reported my insubordination was impressive. "Mom, what did you do?" he yelled without any preamble. "Thomas just called. He was furious. Did you threaten him?" "I stated a fact, David," I said, my voice a stark contrast to his hysteria. "I told him I was investigating a case of fraud. Is that what you call a threat?" "Fraud? What are you talking about?" he blustered, but there was a new tremor in his voice. Fear. "I'm talking about the home equity line of credit, David. I'm talking about a $50,000 loan taken out with my forged signature. My lawyer, Martin Goldstein, finds it very interesting." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line. "You went to a lawyer? You're suing your own son?" The accusation was thick with disbelief, as if I were the one who had committed the ultimate betrayal. "I am protecting myself," I said, enunciating each word carefully, "from a crime that was committed against me." "It was a mistake, a misunderstanding," he stammered, his defense crumbling. "We were going to pay it back. I was going to get a big bonus." "Stop lying, David." I cut him off, the exhaustion with his deceit finally boiling over. There is no bonus, is there? Just like there was no real emergency with the air conditioner or the hardwood floors. It's all been lies. You're trying to ruin me, he shouted, his voice cracking. You're siding with them. You're trying to destroy my marriage, my life, everything. No, David, I said softly, the anger draining away, leaving only a profound sadness. You're doing that all on your own. I ended the call before he could respond. I had nothing more to say. The next few days were quiet. The frantic calls stopped. It was the silence of an enemy regrouping. I spent the time connecting with my new life. I had dinner with Richard Montgomery. He was a widower, a cardiologist at St. Elizabeth's, and the brother of my boss, Rebecca. He was kind, intelligent, and he looked at me as if I were the most interesting woman in the world. He didn't see a tired old nurse or a put-upon mother. He saw Margaret. We talked about books and music and travel. It was the first time in years I had a conversation that wasn't about someone else's problems. Then, 2 days before Christmas Eve, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Catherine. Can we please talk? It's important. I can't talk at home. My first instinct was suspicion. Was this another Parker family tactic? But there was a desperate edge to the text that felt different. I agreed to meet her at a small, out-of-the-way cafe across town. She was already there when I arrived, huddled in a corner booth. She looked terrible. The confident, polished woman I knew was gone, replaced by someone pale and haunted, with dark circles under her eyes. She clutched a coffee cup with trembling hands. "Thank you for coming," she whispered as I sat down. "Michael doesn't know I'm here. He would kill me." "What's going on, Catherine?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She took a shaky breath, and the story tumbled out of her, a torrent of secrets and shame. It started about 2 years ago. She discovered that David wasn't just bad with money, he had a secret, a gambling addiction. It began with online sports betting, a hobby he said he could control. But it had spiraled. The urgent requests for money, the broken appliances, the unexpected bills, it was all to cover his losses. "The mortgage money you were sending, Barbara," she trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "A lot of it never even went to the bank. He was trying to win back what he'd lost." A wave of nausea washed over me. The extra shifts, the skipped meals, the worry, all of it had been fuel for his addiction. "And the HELOC?" I asked, my voice a dead whisper. "That was his rock bottom," she choked out. "He was in deep. He said he just needed one big score to make it all right. He practiced your signature for a week before he went to the bank. I knew it was wrong. I knew it. But I was so scared. Scared of losing the house, scared of what my father would say, scared of admitting our perfect life was a complete lie." She finally looked up and her eyes were filled with tears. "Last night your lawyer's letter arrived, a formal notice of the fraud investigation. Michael, he lost it. He said I had to fix it, that I had to come to you, apologize, grovel, do whatever it took to make you drop it and start giving us money again." "And what did you say?" "I said no," she said, a flicker of strength in her voice. "I told him it was over, that he needed help. He got angry. He didn't hit me, but he swept everything off the table. He said if I didn't fix this, he would tell my father everything, not just about the gambling, but other things, other debts I didn't even know about." She was trapped between a husband who was an addict and a father who valued reputation above all else. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her composure finally breaking. In that moment, I didn't see the woman who had sneered at my home or barred me from her Christmas table. I saw a terrified young woman whose life was unraveling. My son had done this to her. I reached across the table and placed my hand on hers. Her skin was ice cold. "Yes, you do," I said quietly. "You can come home with me. I have a guest room.
It's not fancy, but it's safe. Catherine stared at me, her mouth agape. But after everything, why would you do that for me? Because you're still family, I said simply, and because my son put you in this mess. It's time someone helped you get out. Bringing Catherine home felt surreal. The same woman who had declared my house unfit for her presence was now unpacking a small suitcase in my spare bedroom, her shoulders slumped in defeat and relief. The room was small, with a floral quilt my own mother had made, a world away from the cold, modern aesthetic of her Lakeview Heights mansion. I don't know how to thank you, Barbara, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, I said, putting a fresh set of towels on the bed. Just rest. We'll figure out the next steps tomorrow. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the sun glinting off a fresh dusting of snow. The peace of the morning was shattered at precisely 10 a.m. by a furious pounding on my front door. It wasn't the festive knock of a holiday visitor. It was the sound of rage.
I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. It was David. His face was contorted, his hair disheveled. He looked like a cornered animal. I opened the door just a crack, blocking the entrance with my body. David, you need to leave. Where is she? He demanded, trying to push his way in. I know she's here, that snake. She turned you against me, didn't she? Filled your head with lies. The only lies being told are yours, I said, my voice as cold as the winter air. I was surprised by my own steadiness. The fear was gone, replaced by a protective instinct I hadn't felt since he was a small child running from a barking dog. Catherine is my guest. You will not harass her in my home. Now please leave. This is a family matter, he snarled, his eyes wild. You had no right to interfere. She's my wife. She's a woman you lied to, stole from, and whose life you have systematically destroyed to feed your addiction, I shot back. The word addiction hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. I don't have an addiction, he roared, spittle flying from his lips. I have a system. I just had a run of bad luck. I can win it all back. It was like listening to a stranger. The rational, intelligent son I had raised was gone, replaced by this desperate, delusional creature. I could see Catherine peeking from the top of the stairs, her face white with terror. That sight solidified my resolve. I am going to say this one last time, David, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. This is my home. You are not welcome here in this state. You will turn around, you will walk away, and you will not come back until you are ready to talk about getting professional help. I'm not leaving without my wife, he insisted, planting his feet and trying to shoulder his way past me. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, my 62-year-old body feeling as immovable as an oak tree. Yes, you are, I said clearly, because if you take one more step, I will pick up my phone and I will call the police. I will tell them my estranged son is trespassing and creating a disturbance, and I will press charges. His eyes widened in disbelief. You'd call the cops? On me? Your own son? On Christmas Day? I would do whatever is necessary to keep the people in this house safe, I said, my gaze unwavering. You have brought this on yourself. This is the consequence of your actions. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. His shoulders slumped. The rage in his eyes was replaced by a dawning, horrifying understanding. He had pushed me too far. The one person in the world who had always enabled him, always rescued him, had finally drawn a line he could not cross. He took a step back, then another. He looked from me to the closed door, a lost and broken man. Fine, he muttered, his voice hoarse. Fine, but you tell her this isn't over. He turned and trudged down the walkway, his expensive shoes crunching in the fresh snow. As he reached the sidewalk, he paused and looked back at me, his face suddenly looking young and lost. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, the words barely a whisper. "I love you, Michael," I replied softly, using his given name for the first time in the exchange. "Get help." I closed the door, my body trembling with adrenaline. Catherine slowly walked down the stairs. "I heard everything," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Thank you. No one has ever stood up for me like that. Not even my own father. That's what family is supposed to do. They're supposed to keep you safe." And in that moment, in the quiet of my little house on Christmas Day, with my broken son gone and my broken daughter-in-law beside me, a new, strange, and unexpected family was born. The weeks after Christmas were a blur of legal meetings and quiet, tentative steps toward a new normal. Catherine, with my support and Martin's legal guidance, officially filed for divorce. The process was messy. Discovering the full extent of David's hidden debts was like peeling back the layers of a rotten onion. With each new credit card and payday loan they uncovered, Catherine grew quieter but also more determined. She got a part-time job at a local marketing firm, her first step towards financial independence. She insisted on paying me a modest rent, an offer I accepted because I knew it was crucial for her to reclaim her own agency. Meanwhile, my relationship with Richard blossomed. He was my calm in the storm. We went to concerts, art galleries, and quiet dinners. He listened without judgment as I navigated the treacherous waters with David and Catherine, offering support but never advice unless I asked for it. He was teaching me that a partnership could be about shared joy, not just shared burdens. The main event, the one Martin Goldstein had been preparing for, was scheduled for late February, the St. Elizabeth Hospital Foundation's annual charity gala. It was the biggest social event in Pinecrest, a night where the wealthy and influential gathered to see and be seen. Thomas and Diana Parker were the chairs of the event. It was their kingdom, and Martin had assured me it was the perfect stage. "They value public perception above all else, Margaret," he said in our final strategy meeting. "Therefore, we will force their hand in public. They won't risk a scandal that could tarnish the Parker name." I was terrified. The thought of a public confrontation made my stomach churn. But the thought of letting them sweep David's fraud under the rug was worse. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, looking at a stranger. Richard had insisted on buying me a new dress. It was a deep sapphire blue silk that shimmered when I moved. With my hair professionally styled and wearing the simple pearl necklace James had given me on our 20th anniversary, I looked elegant, powerful. "You look breathtaking, Margaret," Richard said from the doorway, his eyes full of admiration. He looked impossibly handsome in his tuxedo. "Ready to face the lions?" I said. "As I'll ever be," taking his offered arm. Martin would be meeting us there. The ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of chandeliers, ice sculptures, and designer gowns. I spotted the Parkers immediately, holding court at a central table, Diana dripping in diamonds, Thomas beaming with self-importance. David and Catherine were there too, a portrait of misery in formal wear. David looked pale and gaunt, while Catherine stood rigidly by his side, her smile plastered on. They were performing their roles. Richard and I were seated at the hospital's main table, along with Rebecca and other senior physicians. I felt the Parkers' eyes on me throughout the dinner, their looks a mixture of confusion and contempt. They couldn't understand why the dowdy mother-in-law was here, looking confident and seated at a table of prominence. The moment came after the main course.
As planned, Martin Goldstein, looking every bit the formidable family lawyer, arrived and took a seat that had been left empty for him at our table. This was the signal. Thomas Parker took the stage to give his keynote address as the gala's chairman. He spoke eloquently about community, responsibility, and the importance of family. Then he went off script.
In times of trial, he said, his gaze sweeping the room and landing squarely on me, it is the strength of family that sees us through. True character is shown not in grand gestures, but in quiet, unwavering support, in knowing one's place and doing one's duty, no matter the personal cost. It was a public rebuke, a thinly veiled accusation that I had failed in my duty. The air crackled with tension. Richard squeezed my hand under the table. Martin gave me a subtle nod. It was time. After the applause died down, the three of us rose and walked towards the Parkers' table. The chatter around them quieted as we approached. People sensed a confrontation. "Thomas, Diana," Martin said, his voice pleasant but firm. "A wonderful speech." "Martin," said Thomas, surprised. "I didn't know you were here." "I'm here on behalf of my client," he said, gesturing to me. "Margaret Wilson." Diana Parker let out a small, condescending laugh. "Legal counsel. Isn't that a bit dramatic, Barbara?" I looked past her, directly at Thomas. "Mr. Parker," I said, my voice steady and clear, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "I was moved by your words on family and duty. You see, I thought my duty was fulfilled when I paid over $50,000 to support my son's mortgage last year. But I've learned my duty certainly does not extend to ignoring criminal acts." A collective gasp went through the nearby guests. "I'm referring," I continued, my gaze locking with David's, who looked like he was about to faint, "to the matter of the $50,000 home equity line of credit, the one opened with my forged signature." Diana's smile froze on her face. Thomas Parker's jovial mask crumbled. Martin stepped forward, holding a sleek leather folio. "We have a sworn affidavit from a forensic handwriting expert, Thomas, and a very cooperative bank that is eager to avoid litigation over their lax security protocols. My client has been remarkably patient. She has no desire to see her son face federal charges for bank fraud." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "However, that patience is conditional." He slid a single sheet of paper from the folio and placed it on the table in front of Thomas. "This is a summary of David's known gambling debts, which, as you can see, far exceed the fraudulent loan. And this is an admission form for the best inpatient addiction treatment center in the state. You will see that David is checked in by noon tomorrow. You will see that all of his debts, both to my client and to his other creditors, are settled in full by your family. And you will do this quietly and without fuss. In return, my client will agree not to press charges." He leaned in closer. "The alternative," he whispered, "is that I walk over to the district attorney, who is enjoying his dessert at that table right over there, and have a conversation. Your family name will be front page news tomorrow and not in the society section. The choice is yours." The silence was absolute. Thomas Parker stared at the papers, his face the color of ash. Diana looked at her son with a dawning horror, as if seeing him for the first time. David just sat there, broken. I had done it. In the most public of settings, in front of the very people they revered, I had stripped them of their power and exposed the rotten truth beneath their gilded facade. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I had simply presented the facts. I turned away from the table, took Richard's arm, and without a backward glance, we walked out of the ballroom and into the crisp night air, leaving the wreckage of their perfect world behind us. The aftermath of the gala was swift and silent, just as Martin had predicted. There were no newspaper headlines, no public scandals. The Parker family, desperate to contain the damage, moved with ruthless efficiency. David was checked into the rehab facility the next day. A wire transfer for the full amount of the fraudulent loan, plus the $50,400 I had paid for the mortgage, appeared in an account Martin had set up for me. It was a cold, impersonal transaction, an attempt to purchase my silence. I accepted it not as hush money, but as restitution. It was what I was owed.
Catherine's divorce proceeded quickly. The Parkers, eager to sever all ties to the mess, did not contest it. They provided her with a small settlement, enough to get her own apartment and start over, a quiet admission of their own role in the pressure cooker that had contributed to the disaster. She moved out of my house a month after the gala. The day she left, she hugged me tightly at the door. "I'll never be able to repay you for your kindness, Barbara," she said, her eyes glistening. "Just live a good life, Catherine, an honest one. That's repayment enough." We promised to stay in touch, and to my surprise, we did. We met for coffee once a month, two women bound by a strange and painful chapter in our lives, slowly forging a new relationship based on mutual respect. With my finances restored and my life my own again, I officially retired from St. Elizabeth's. The day I packed up my office, Rebecca threw me a small party. Richard was there, holding my hand. It didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a commencement. My life began to fill with things I had long postponed. I joined the community garden with Ellie, finding a deep satisfaction in plunging my hands into the soil and nurturing new life. Richard and I took a trip to the coast of Maine, and I stood on the rocky shores, breathing in the salty air, feeling a sense of peace I didn't know was possible. David was in treatment for 6 months. I didn't visit him. His therapist advised against it, explaining that he needed to face his demons on his own, without his mother as a safety net. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, to intentionally stay away from my child when he was in pain. But I was learning the difference between helping and enabling. Instead, I joined a support group for families of addicts. I sat in a circle with other parents, spouses, and children, and I listened to their stories of heartbreak and hope. I shared my own, my voice shaking at first, then grown stronger with each meeting. I learned that my story was not unique. The details were different, but the themes of love, betrayal, and the painful necessity of setting boundaries were universal. The first letter from David arrived after he had been in the program for 4 months. It was not an apology, not yet. It was a raw, angry, confused mess of words, blaming me, blaming Catherine, blaming his father for the pressure he felt. I read it, acknowledged the pain he was in, and wrote back a single sentence. "I love you, and I'm here for you when you're ready to take responsibility for your own life." 2 months later, just before he was discharged, a second letter came. This one was different. The anger was gone, replaced by a fragile, humbling clarity.
"Mom," it began, "I don't know where to start. For years, I told myself a story where I was the victim, a victim of circumstance, of pressure, of bad luck. I see now that the only villain in my story was me. I took your love, your trust, and your security, and I burned it all to feed a monster inside me. I am sorry. Those words are so small for the damage I've done. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. But I want you to know that I am trying. I am finally, truly trying. I have a mountain of debt to repay and a lifetime of amends to make. But for the first time in a very long time, I am not lying. Not to you and not to myself. Your son, David." I cried when I read that letter. Not tears of sadness, but tears of a painful, cleansing relief. The son I thought I had lost was still in there, buried beneath years of deceit and addiction. His recovery would be a long, uncertain road, but he had finally taken the first step. 1 year after that fateful Christmas, I stood in my garden. The climbing roses Richard and I had planted were thriving, their deep red blooms a vibrant splash of color against the old wooden fence. The garden club was meeting at my house, and the air was filled with the easy laughter of friends. Catherine was there, showing Ellie a new marketing brochure she had designed for her own small consultancy. She looked happy, truly happy in a way she never had when she lived in the mansion in Lakeview Heights. Richard came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "Look at what you've built, Margaret," he said softly, resting his chin on my shoulder. I knew he wasn't just talking about the garden. He was talking about this life, this community of caring people I had woven together from the ashes of my old one. "We built it,"
I corrected him, leaning back against his chest. Later that evening, as the sun set, I sat on my porch swing, a glass of iced tea in my hand. My phone buzzed with a text from David. 1 year sober today. Thank you for not giving up on me by finally giving up on my lies. I smiled. The path had been excruciating, but standing on the other side, I knew with every fiber of my being that it had been worth it. I had stopped paying for a house, but in doing so, I had given my son, my daughter-in-law, and myself something far more valuable, the chance to build a life based on truth. The following spring, my life bore little resemblance to the one I had been living just 18 months prior. The sale of my little house on Maple Street, the container of so much joy and so much pain, was bittersweet. But moving into the new home Richard and I had bought together felt like turning a definitive page. It was a house with big windows that let in the morning sun and a backyard big enough for the ambitious garden we had planned. It was a house built not on history and obligation, but on the promise of a shared future. I had found a new rhythm. 3 days a week, I volunteered at a local hospice, offering comfort to patients and their families. It was the part of nursing I'd always loved most, the human connection, without the crushing administrative burdens and exhausting hours. The rest of my time was mine. I took a pottery class, discovering a surprising talent for shaping clay into imperfect but beautiful bowls. I traveled with Richard, our first big trip being a 2-week exploration of Italy, where we ate pasta, drank wine, and walked until our feet ached, feeling younger than our years. Our home became a gathering place for our found family. Sunday dinners were a regular occurrence, a boisterous affair with Ellie, Grace, Rebecca, and often Catherine. Her initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a warm, easy camaraderie. She and I had found a strange, wonderful new relationship, something between a mother-daughter bond and a deep friendship between two survivors. She would often bring her new boyfriend, an unassuming and kind accountant named Mark, who clearly adored her for who she was, not for her family name. Thomas and Diana Parker were a different story. After the public humiliation at the gala, they had retreated from the Pinecrest social scene for a time. But to their credit, the shock seemed to have woken something up in them. They poured their considerable resources into funding the new addiction treatment wing at St. Elizabeth's. Diana joined my family support group, sitting quietly in the back at first, just listening. One evening, after a meeting, she approached me. "Margaret," she said, her voice stripped of its usual haughtiness. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior, for my blindness. I was so focused on the image of success that I couldn't see the disaster unfolding in my own family. It takes courage to admit that," I said honestly. "I just hope," she said, her eyes welling up, "that it's not too late for David." David's journey was the most difficult of all. Recovery, I learned, is not a straight line. It's a series of forward steps and painful stumbles. He lived in a sober living house for the first year and worked a menial job at a warehouse, the physical labor a stark contrast to his previous corporate life. He attended his Gamblers Anonymous meetings religiously. He was working with a credit counselor to chip away at the mountain of debt he had created. He and I began to talk on the phone. Our conversations stilted at first. There was so much damage, so much left unsaid. We didn't talk about the past. Instead, we talked about the present, his work, my garden, the weather. It was the slow, painstaking work of rebuilding a bridge that had been burned to the ground. About 2 years after the gala, he called me. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "I'm moving into my own apartment next month. It's small, but it's mine. I wondered if you'd like to see it when I'm settled." "I'd love that," I said, a lump forming in my throat. When I visited his small apartment above a garage in a working-class neighborhood, I was struck by its Spartan simplicity. There was a second-hand couch, a small TV, and a few books. There were no designer furnishings, no signs of the lavish lifestyle he had once chased. On his kitchen counter was a framed photo. It wasn't of him and Catherine at their extravagant wedding.
It was a faded picture of him as a little boy sitting on his father's shoulders in our backyard on Maple Street. "I found it when I was cleaning out some old boxes," he said, noticing my gaze, "to remind me of what's actually important." We sat and had coffee, and for the first time, we talked about what had happened. He didn't make excuses. He owned his choices, his lies, his addiction. "The sickest part, Mom," he said, staring into his cup, "is that I think I was addicted to the risk as much as the gambling. The risk of getting caught, of losing everything. It was a way to feel something because I felt so empty inside, trying to be this person my in-laws wanted me to be." He finally looked at me. "When you stood up to me on Christmas Day, when you refused to back down, in a strange way, it was the first time I felt a consequence that was real. It was the beginning of my bottom."
As I drove home that day, I realized that our relationship, now being rebuilt on a foundation of painful honesty, was stronger than it had ever been when it was based on financial dependence and unspoken resentments. I had lost the son I thought I wanted, the successful, high-flying executive, but I was slowly getting back the son I had always loved, the real, flawed, and finally honest man. 3 years to the day after that fateful Christmas, I found myself standing on a small stage in the new wing of St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The Parker Center for Addiction and Recovery was having its official dedication ceremony. I had been asked, as a longtime nurse and a family member affected by addiction, to say a few words. The room was filled with hospital board members, local dignitaries, and families like mine whose lives had been upended by the disease. Richard was in the front row, his smile giving me strength. In the row behind him, Catherine sat next to her new husband, Mark. A few seats down, Diana and Thomas Parker sat, looking humbled and proud, and near the back, standing by himself, was David. He had driven up from the city where he now worked as a peer counselor, using his own painful experience to help others. He looked healthy, his eyes clear. When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't use my prepared notes. I decided to speak from the heart. "My name is Margaret Wilson," I began, "and for most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant protecting my child from harm, from struggle, from consequences. I thought love was a blank check, a bottomless well of support, no matter the cost to myself." I looked out at the faces in the crowd. "I was wrong," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I learned through the most painful experience of my life that sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is to say no, to build a wall not to keep your child out, but to give them something solid to push off from, to force them to stand on their own 2 feet. My act of saying no felt like abandonment. It felt like failure. Today I know it was an act of profound, terrifying love. I spoke about the importance of boundaries, not as punishment, but as a framework for healthy relationships. I spoke about the courage it takes for families to face the truth and the incredible power of community in the healing process. This center, I said, gesturing to the gleaming new facility around us, is a testament to the fact that even out of the deepest pain and public humiliation, something beautiful and life-affirming can be built. It proves that it is never too late to rewrite your story. As I finished, the room erupted in applause, but my eyes were on my son. He was looking at me, tears streaming down his face, and he was smiling. It was a smile of gratitude, of understanding, of a shared and survived history. After the ceremony, we all gathered for a small reception. It was a strange and miraculous assembly. Thomas Parker shook my hand, his grip firm. "Thank you, Margaret," he said, "for not giving up on him, and for showing us what real strength looks like." David came over and gave me a long, heartfelt hug. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered. "I'm proud of you too, David," I whispered back, my own eyes filling with tears. Later, as Richard and I drove home, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink.
We were planning another trip, this time to the Greek islands, a dream I had once shared with James and now would share with Richard. "You know," Richard said, taking my hand, "that woman who walked into Martin Goldstein's office 3 years ago, the one who was scared and felt so alone, I wish she could see you now." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think she can," I said. "I carry her with me every day. She reminds me how far I've come." That night, I sat on my porch, looking up at the vast starry sky. I thought about the house on Maple Street, the gala, the painful phone calls, the forged signature. They were no longer wounds. They were scars, and scars are proof of healing. They are the map of where you have been and a testament to your ability to survive. The greatest gift I had given myself wasn't the money I'd recovered or the new love I'd found. It was the knowledge that I was worthy of respect, worthy of honesty, worthy of a life lived on my own terms. It's a lesson that came late in my life, but one that I will carry with me for all the days I have left. And it's a truth I hope anyone out there feeling lost or taken for granted can find for themselves. It is never, ever too late to become the person you were meant to be.